Welcome to the PROCON podcast, hosted by Paul Vogels, with expert guest interviews, case study reviews, and insightful discussion topics. The PROCON podcast leads the project controls conversation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PROCON podcast. Today, we are virtually a guest at the Primaned Academy because we are back at our bi-weekly educational track. Today, we're gonna strike two birds with one stone. We got some questions on a blog we published from the Primaned Academy called Project Planning Training, Your Internal versus External Training Options Explained. And on the other hand, we want to explain two questions we got at the PROCON podcast. As you all know, PROCON podcast is leading the project controls conversation, and everybody is welcome to post their questions online or send us an email, podcast@primaned.com, or visit the website proconpodcast.com, and please ask your questions where we can actually go into this. So today, a one-man show from the Primaned Academy on this blog page. So those questions I will answer in the review of this blog. And if you have any other questions, again, please email to us. The project planning training, internal versus external, goes into detail on the internal training options, which you can do by educating your own. One of the key users, for example, on Microsoft projects or on Primavera or OPC or whatever tooling you use, you can have him, if he or she is a really good trainer, train the rest of your crew. And on the other hand, like Primaned Academy, there are some external training options which you might go into. The idea with the internal training option, or the problem or the challenge, however you want to call it, is it's not the profession most of the times of that internal trainer. And within a professional training center, there is a team of teachers, of trainers who are educating each other, who are reviewing each other. It's really a peer review system where the actual core business of an academy is training people. If you're a contractor, a real big contractor, and you have an internal training center, then the idea is that those people have the experience from your company, and they don't actually train other industries. They don't get peer reviewed by course participants, etc. So it's always practice what you preach, we say at the academy. So our teachers, our course leaders really are also consultants, have field experience, talk with teachers internally, externally, etc., and are actually being reviewed every single course by the course participants, by the trainees, if you want to call them trainees. So the idea of an external trainer is to broaden the horizon, to teach you more than you might need in your day-to-day job, so that you are also educating internal ambassadors. One of the very simple example is for example with the Primavera P6 training. It's 15, 16 chapters, and one of the chapters is resources, and not everybody is using resource-loaded schedules. Again, at the academy, we train the chapter on resources. So if a contractor doesn't use it right now, he actually has an internal key user who might advise later on when the implementation is going or the schedule has a need for a resource-loaded schedule to actually be an internal implementation partner for your organization. With a broader experience, you can go into the real details later on, hey, this is what I learned. I got my manual. Let's talk about the manual later on, for example. But I got my manual. I will look back at chapter 15 to refresh my memory on, in this case, resources. So we actually can look at this. Internal looks internal, external looks external. So that's one of the big differences between an internal training session and an external training session. So let's go a little bit deeper into the external training provider. And yes, we are going to use Primaned Academy as the example, because we actually wrote the blog in this case, and we are hosting the PROCON podcast in this case. External training can come in 3 different options, in 3 different deployment models. I will go on later on a bespoke training versus a standard training. But let's first run into the 3 different options which we have explained in the blog, which you can download at the primaned.com page. First one is the most simple one. It's an open registration. So actually there is a schedule on our website where we say in January 15th, we're doing this training. In January 18th, we're doing that training. February, March, etc. All the trainings are really planned in advance with a trainer on top of it to attract people for this open registration. Open registration, really simple. You just fill out a form on the website and you are more than welcome after receiving the invoice, of course, to be part of one of the 9 seats which we have at the Primaned Academy. 9 is the maximum participants in this case, because we really believe that open physical education needs personal attention. We can't divide the attention of the teacher with 20 participants, so we have a maximum of 9 in this case. Let's say you registered for the foundation course, which is the very basic of project controls. It's a 2-day training course where you learn about the theoretical part, and it's on 18th of 19th September. 2 days. You come in and you meet people who are also interested in the same course. So you have 7 or 8 or 9 participants actually interested in project controls, in this case in the foundation, could be tooling, could be anything, but in the same subject. Not everybody does have the same experience, does have the same environment. Maybe one of the gentlemen or girls is working at the municipality, where they, from a contractor point of view, have a different approach than from a municipality point of view. But they want to learn how to schedule. They want to learn how to use tools like Primavera. Also different industries. A infrastructure contractor could be sitting next to an offshore EPC contractor, for example. And in this, different project controls approach, you learn how other industries have maybe the same challenge or the same issues or the same project delays, for example. So you can learn how different industries cope with different or with the same issues in this case. So with an open registration, it's really easy, really cost effective, because you only need to pay for 1 seat and not for the whole training day. And the trainer cost and the development cost and the academy cost is divided by 8 or 9 participants. So it's fairly simple, very easy to come into the academy. In this case, to go for an open registration of 6. Are there also cons? Yes, there are also cons, because it's the academy schedule. If you are not able to attend day 2 on the 19th of January, then you need to wait until the next time the academy has an open slot for you to participate in day 2. So yes, there are pros. Yes, there are also some cons, but if you are alone or with 1 or 2 participants, an open registration is a very good and cost-effective way of doing this. I will go on later on what the difference is between a standard approach on an academy training or on a bespoke made to measure for your organization, because there's a big difference, but that's the same for every deployment method, let's call it that way, on this academy. Besides the open registration, of course, in company, our trainer can bring 8 or 9 books, manuals, let's talk about that later, to your premises to give an in-company training. It's actually the same education you get. It's the same script. All of our trainers, we have 13 trainers within the Primaned Academy. Not everybody is expert or experienced in the same training. For example, Primavera has more trainers than Microsoft or Earned Value Management in this case. But we have different trainers which we can send to your premises, for example, to give the Earned Value Management training. Same manual, developed by our academy. We come into, you need an office or a training room where we have laptops and the beamer and the flipboard and or whiteboard, etc. A coffee, of course, which is very important. It's a good ventilated area where we can give the training. Same educational content you get, and one of the different pros. It's a pro, but sometimes if you want to learn from other industries, it's a con. All the participants have the same interest because they all want to learn Earned Value Management in example, and they all have the same experience because everybody, from an industry point of view, everybody in your company has the same goal to make the project controls more targeted for a contractor or for an offshore industry, etc. So you can actually look at projects. What we always hear from our participants is, do you know the project which gone really bad or which gone really good? And that's a really good example. We all have this flagship project or this project which had a lot of struggles, and that can lead as a good example, for example, as a good metaphor on how to improve or how to learn from experiences. So our trainer with our manual, our script, comes into your premises, teaches 8 or 9 people into your premises. Price-wise, it's very good because you have a big group. You can split the cost per person, and we can have that, for example, in your company. A really downside, we believe, is we come into your environment. So in the back of your head, you still have your working ethics on. What we see is that people come in late. I had to take this call at 8:30. Sorry, I'm 5 minutes late. I run into another colleague at the coffee machine. I am 5 minutes late. Can I go a little bit earlier because I have an important meeting and it's just down the hall? So I'm going to leave 30 minutes. I'm not going to miss a lot because I'm also in the premises. What we always say, and that's free of charge at the Primaned Academy, we can do an in-company training, but we are actually getting all your people from Amsterdam, for example, into Rotterdam, into our Primaned Academy, where they can let go of the day-to-day business. Nobody is bothering them on this meeting minutes, etc. We have great coffee in the Primaned Academy. We are going to lunch outside of the office if applicable, because we want to let the content sink in, talk over lunch on different topics, get some free fresh air, some oxygen, etc., and then come back in at 1 o'clock and make the afternoon dedicated to learning project controls, to be educated on project controls. So that's a very different approach. Yes, of course, we can travel to your premises, but you can travel to our premises free of charge to get a real better return on investment, if you want to call it that way, on education, because you are not distracted as much as when you are in your own office, for example. Well, COVID hit us hard in Europe, in the US, everywhere else. So people are not used to going into the office again, into educational centers again. Big groups, 9 people, well, not close to each other, but reasonably close to each other. So a year or 2 ago, you've seen the rise of online training. People still need to be educated, and online training got a real. I'm talking into a camera with a virtual background. Everybody is used to Zoom and Teams and Blue Jeans and whatever there is out there. But online training is also there to stay. Sometimes hybrid, some people internally, some people online, but also online trainings have been conducted quite a lot the last past years, months in our Primaned Academy. Can you get the same revenue return on investment on it? Yes, we think there is, especially when you do software training, tool training, for example, like Safran or risk analysis of P6, etc. There's a big advantage on doing it online because you can see the teacher still with the camera on, but also maybe on a split screen or on a picture-in-picture point of view. You can also work in the software. We can monitor this online, but we really believe that go for online training, always go for instructor-led training. So a real physical person doing the training before in front of the camera, with the good audio, with the good video quality, with a lot of screens where he can monitor his students, can get the eye-to-eye contact, which is still very important to let people not be distracted, but led by the instructor. It's still a really good possibility to get the educationals. What we do, for example, is we mail the manual physically to each other, to the participants, and don't send over the PDF, because we actually want people to have a book in their hand, where they can see and write things down, note, highlight, etc. Flip your page, fold your page, whatever, and you have a manual which you can read later on. So the online training, just the same training, but on a different deployment model, instructor-led, room for questions. We can take over screens, we can do chats, etc., highlight things on the screen, etc. But it's still the same educational content for this. I told you, in an online training, we send over the manual, and the manual is actually something we develop ourselves by years and years of experience implementing software, for example, reselling software. We know all the functions and features of software. We have a staffing agency within Primaned where we have 50 to 60 people actually doing field with their feet in the clay, we call it in the Netherlands, actually working, roll up their sleeves, making planning and making schedules. Every single course, there's an evaluation. Every typo has been edited. Every tip and trick from our participants will be considered, will be talked through with the teachers, with our manager academy, Stefan Hollack, which you have seen in one of the earlier PROCON podcasts. We will develop and redevelop our manual. There are a lot of good books out there on P6, on earned value management, etc. But it's for another way of teaching. Our manuals are built up from the ground. There's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of work in it. We will distribute it whenever somebody comes in a training. That's a real big difference between manual. So some people, where we say, okay, this manual is a standard process, is a standard script. One question I got from an international global company said, okay, can I use local US trainers and Europe trainers and European trainers and, for example, Australian? Yes, of course, that's a possibility. Primaned is a European, is an EMEA company where we have project in, Europe and Middle East Asia, for example, Saudi Arabia, Africa, that kind of countries we are active in. We are really Europe-based. We have an office, our Primaned Academy, where we are right now, is in Rotterdam. Close to the harbor, close to the city center. That's where planning and scheduling began in the petrochemical industry, for example. That's where Primavera grew up. That's our headquarters in Rotterdam. We have an office, a sister organization in Belgium, in Antwerp. We have a German organization who is responsible for the DACH region with real native trainers in German, for example, which is situated in Frankfurt, but can roll out to the rest of Germany as well with flexible academy training offices. We have a Primaned Academy, for example, and we are growing. And so from a European point of view, we have a big team which is growing and growing. And one very good example we think is where we want to a global tender on educating. It's a real it's a company who build trains, for example, light rail trains, real big trains globally. US, Europe, Asia, Australia, etc., etc. We want to train our global PMO. Our global PMO is responsible for global projects because in England there's a production site, and in Middle East Asia there is some fabrication sites, some assembly sites, etc. And we want to train our PMO. So how are we going to do it? Well, we said we take travel into account, but by training everybody in the same script, in the same content. If somebody from the Netherlands is talking to somebody from Philadelphia, in this case, about what's the total float, or who owns the float, or what's a contingency, or whatever you want to talk about, they all have the same baggage, they all have the same experience, and the same knowledge, the same script, the same books, the same, etc., etc. That's where a standard global training has had a lot of profit. So by doing training by different companies, there are a lot of P6 trainers in Europe, there are a lot of P6 trainers in Australia and in Europe, of course. By doing it with different companies, well, you use the uniformity, and it's all about people and processes and tools, as you might remember if you listen to earlier podcasts. So uniformity is a big differentiator by having one global institute training everybody. So that's why we always say, well, yes, it will cost you an extra train ticket or a plane ticket, but it will return on investment 3, 4, 5 times as much, because you don't need to explain what they learned. You don't need to, and there are no gaps in the educational track. One other question we got in from one of our listeners, one of our subscribers on the PROCON podcast is, why don't you teach our process? For example, we did this. We did it a lot of times, of course. For example, in a rail company, there's a big difference in training a standard script and in a bespoke script. There are different pros, there are different cons. One of the pros on a standard script is we maintain it. As I mentioned earlier, we maintain it on a monthly or quarterly basis whenever we have executed our training. There's also some reviews, there's some new trends, there's some new functionality. P6 is growing, there's a new version with a new feature, for example. We want to weave that into our training. So every a couple of iterations, there will be new modules, new features added into the training. So we are responsible for maintaining that training. If you get a training now and one from 2 years ago, 99% is the same, updated to the latest version, etc. And that's always available to everybody. If you got a training from 98 and you come to our office and say, "Can I have the new manual?" Yes, you can. The other thing is, we teach you the standard way how Primavera, in this case, and let's take that as an example, is used. It's used by 80% of the people in the same way, 80% in the same way. If your company has a different process, for example, on rights or rules in security, then not everybody can do the same thing. So what we sometimes do is give you the standard training where you teach, this is how you create a new project in Primavera, but with an attachment or an addendum, we say, within your company, it actually is restricted by the rules and the rights in the security model to only be available to project managers or to CFOs or to, well, whatever level of security is applied. But you know what they need to do. You just need to get an approval for that. Then you still get the benefits of this standard training, and there's a little bit of tweaking to the bespoke processes, agreements, security, whatever you want to name, into your specific organization. It's a loose leaflet. It's an attachment, if you move from company A to company B, you still have the full package of training content in your mind and in your fingertips. But well, within company A, we did it this way, but in company B, it might be able that I create the project myself. So that's a really big difference. If you are a very specific organization or have very specific processes, you name things different, for example, or different ways of creating such insights. What we can do is we can mix and match content from different courses into one course, 1 day, 3 days. We did complete training processes for 7-8 days, for example. What's applicable, what's relevant to your company with your nomenclature, with your processes in it. We make a specific manual for your company. It's called the Primaned Academy Manual for Company A, with this content, with this processes actually in it. It's not our Primavera screenshot, it's your Primavera screenshot. It's not the standard process of creating a project, but it's your process of creating a project. What will you need to take into account is you are responsible, and of course we are there to help you, but you are responsible on the frequency of updating this. If you want to train it yourself, it's available. If you want to be trained by the Primaned Academy in your process, it's available as well. But we need to come in every year, every 6 months, whatever you want, sometimes every 4 years, to update your specific process to the latest version, to this process, etc. That's a very different way of approaching. Yes, it's more bespoke, so people actually know what they need to do. Sometimes it's the work instruction or even onboarding processes can be in there. But on the other hand, you might miss out updated version or standard way of working. So that's a really big difference what you need to take into account. If you have more interest in this blog, please download blog.primaned.com. You can find it. It's called Project Planning Training. It's one of the blogs actually in the Head of Planning series, where we have a complete set of information around project controls education. This one is specifically written for internal versus external training. We got really good feedback on this, and we got some questions which I try to explain. If you have a specific question on this topic or another project, or another topic, please send me an email, podcast@primaned.com, or look at it on our website, www.proconpodcast.com. This will be on the podcast series as well. In 2 weeks, we have a new use case. It's a very, very cool one. I can't explain it yet, but please subscribe on the PROCON podcast so you get a reminder and an email when it's broadcasted. Also through the available channels, Apple, Spotify podcast, which is on this page as well, to listen it in your own way of consuming it. Thanks again. Please listen to the PROCON podcast, subscribe. Send some feedback if you have a use case, if you have an educational question, or, for example, one of the software specials we are doing with Oracle and PM Web, Safran, etc. We are really leading the whole controls conversation. So conversation is meaning we listen as well. So if you listen to us, we will listen to you. Thanks again for listening, and try to see or hear you back in 2 weeks. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for listening to the PROCON podcast.
Thanks for listening to the PROCON podcast. To listen and watch more episodes, you can subscribe and access the resources mentioned in this episode by visiting proconpodcast.com. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode, where we will continue to lead the project controls conversation. The PROCON podcast and the associated resources is published under copyright to Primaned. All rights reserved, no reproduction of this content is permitted.